I've been writing for 20 years now, self-publisher since the beginning. At the age of 17, I wrote and circulated my first book, Antidepressants. This was a collection of short stories, poems, lyrics, and ink drawings. I ran off about 50 copies and stapled them together. I sold them for $7 a copy and used the proceeds to finance a great many rejection letters from various magazines and publishing houses. Denied but not deterred, I started writing as an outlet, and I continued to write out of compulsion. See, I was trying to find answers to what I now recognize are mostly unanswerable questions. In grade 11, my friend, she showed me her wrists, freshly cut and faintly infected. Helpless, I composed a song, Demolition Baby. I was angry at her for showing me the cuts, but more at myself for not knowing what to say. I sang out loud, but only to myself. I'm so scared she'll leave. Die and rest in peace. A few years later, flying from Frankfurt to Ontario, I wondered not what it would be like to die in a plane crash, but what it would be like to survive. Vividly, I could see the chaos around me as people were trampled in an attempt to make the exits. I heard the crunch of a skull connecting with the ceiling of the aircraft as it descended suddenly. I imagined the guilt associated with living. I wrote my first draft of what would become The Survivor on the inside jacket of a Stephen King novel. I wrote as my wife slept on, oblivious beside me. In a moment she would be awake, panicked and afraid. I would tell her that everything would be okay. I was lying and I didn't know it. In the story, she wouldn't survive. I wondered about God, that great bearded weirdo in the sky. I've considered my Pentecostal upbringing, my rebellion as a teenager, and what it might have meant for me for so many years to consider myself agnostic. Christian, atheist, agnostic, universalist. I've been each of these, yet I have not truly followed the precepts of any single classification. More recently, I have chosen to reject all labels, questioning traditions and dogmas, seeking truth. I get really annoyed when people tell me that I have to do such and such in order to receive this or that. Recognizing a power greater than myself, I've chosen to stand outside what some have considered orthodox, and yet I've still felt at loss when faced with the problem of pain. Coming across an elderly couple bickering in their basement, I chose to sit back and observe. Later, as I saw clarity, I wrote in first person. I became a participant. Too old and burnt out to be a useful member of society, I was building a rental suite in the basement to supplement Asian CPP. My old lady, she uncrossed her arms. She brought a swollen finger to my chest. She jabbed me, accused me. She said, "You never take me out anymore." She made her hands fists. "Stefan," she insisted. Her face was flushed, her chest heated. She enunciated each word to me. "You will take me out." I turned away, compared my work to the diagram that I'd had the guys at Home Depot prepare for me. "It wasn't always like this," my old lady squawked, stomping her feet. She began to cry, but the whole scene rang false. It was a trick, more of her games. The television came on above us, sharp, loud, intrusive. We looked up in unison. Face to face, she warned me, "I need to get out of this goddamn house!" Slowly, I reached up to my ear, turned off the aid that slept there. My old lady, she began to shake me, and I gently removed her arm. I drove a fresh nail into the wood. She moaned, "I need to get out." In my mind, I was thinking nothing. Absolutely nothing. I began to take deep, slow breaths. I was focusing on the sound of the furnace. Hacha, hacha, as the pilot ignited. I could envision the flame's head kept alive by a steady diet of gas and oxygen. I tried to imagine that I was alone. My line of vision fell in with that of my old lady once more. Our eyes met and she stuck out her tongue, spiteful and ugly. I was an old man, and my cat-quick reflexes, they surprised even me. My hands still gripped to the hammer. It hurt. My knuckles began to scream. The claw end of the hammer had somehow embedded itself deep into the flesh of my old lady's face, caught between her eyes. I wondered, how did that happen? Blood began to stream out of her mouth, her nose. It ran down her face, thick and bright. It pooled in the hollow of her cleavage. She blinked her eyes once, twice, 3 times. Ugly. I jerked my wrist, and there was a weight to the hammer as the claw released. It tugged on my elbow. I could feel a pressure that gripped my entire body. It ran down my legs, through my testicles. There was a quick pulling, and then a sound like the plum popped from the pie of little Jack Horner. For half a decade, I vomited out and transcribed this kind of darkness that I sometimes still find locked inside of me. In the past, this has been very healthy, but ultimately, the healing that I've found in writing, it eventually began to undermine the actual process itself. Around 2000, my output began to slow down. By 2003, it hit a complete block. See, I was content, married, 2 kids. I had a managerial job in a restaurant that, even if it didn't satisfy me, it did provide for the needs of my family. I was in love, and although I had 3 trunk novels in the basement, by 2005 I had completely given up on ever being a writer. The reality was that I didn't know how to create from a place of contentment. It was completely alien to me. For a time I tried to sit down and will myself to write. My mom bought me a computer to try to stimulate some kind of brainstorm. It was depressing. I didn't try very hard. I didn't even care. It took me nearly 5 years to write again. There wasn't a switch where suddenly I was inspired when the day before I hadn't been. Rather, it was a reversal of the loss of motivation that had led to writer's block, a series of events. I began working with youth, which led to creating YouTube videos, which led to playing guitar again, which led back to writing. One day I had an idea. It hit me, and I couldn't let go. One story gave birth to another, and after a time I began to go into the basement and rewrite some of my older stories. In 2011, after 17 years, I was finally able to publish my first real book, Snapshots of Growing Old by the Side of the Road. In 2012, I published Emily and the Others. Today when I write, I'm still looking for the answers to the unanswerable questions that I see around me. Only I'm no longer writing from a place of anger or hurt. By walking through darkness, I've discovered hope. As I rejected the rigmarole of religion, I came to discover something more meaningful than I could ever have imagined. Finding inspiration, I've written not as a coping mechanism, but as an expression of joy. My new book, Beware of Labels, said the Hungry Agnostic, is a culmination of all of this. These essays, stories, letters, poems, they're more honest than I've ever been. Transparent, they represent the love I have for my family, the passion I have for my work, and the light that I've glimpsed within myself. So I'm just going to read a short piece from my new book. It's called The Cell. A discarded iPhone 4S refurbished and resold on Kijiji for $85. The memory is empty but for the pre-installed applications and one forgotten voice memo. Curious, you press play. There's silence and then a voice. Hello? The sound is unmistakably male, maybe 30 or 40, it's hard to tell. There's a sound like footsteps, wet and sloppy. There's a gust of wind, distant and haunting. The man is out of breath as he begins to speak. He says, I found myself in a position of authority over this young man. We'll call him William for professional reasons. The voice pauses, his teeth chatter briefly, and he coughs. Poor William, he continues, light amusement in his tone. William was 15 years old when I met him. He was in a bit of trouble for one thing or another. He had a history of acting out, history of violence. It was my job to keep William busy, to monitor him while he completed his assigned chores, and to find more things for him to do. It was also my job to complete the paperwork should he decide not to do his work, should he choose to leave the facility. So we talked, him and me, as he scrubbed the stairs. There was a toothbrush, and he dug into the corners and baseboards. We talked as he cleaned out the oven, pulling the shelves and setting them to soak. We talked as he pulled apart the fridge, determining food from rot by sight, smell, and taste. Occasionally as we talked, I would play guitar gently. I was practicing scales and goofing around with simple songs, knocking on heaven's doors, Teen Spirit, or Mary Had a Little Lamb even. Here we are now, entertain us. Laughing, William began to sing along. Life is stupid and contagious. There's a pause as the man collects his thoughts. There's a sound of a car at distance and then close. And the time it went quickly, William and me, hanging out while the rest of the house was out for recreation. These were the boys who weren't in trouble, and time went fast. Time went fast, just talking and cleaning and playing guitar, sometimes singing and laughing. The boys came back a few hours later and the dynamic changed. Everything was louder and the pace was much faster suddenly. Really fast, I mean. We had group, we had supper, and then the night was over. It's another moment of silence, 10, maybe 15 seconds. Even the footsteps halt suddenly. There's another brief chatter of teeth again, then. I only worked there once a week, maybe 3 times a month, and so I appreciated this time that we had shared, William and I. This might be the only opportunity that I had to get to really connect with him, and so I made a genuine effort to talk with him before I left. I wanted him to know how the day had gone for me, and I wanted to know how he felt the day had gone for him. So I told William that I'd really enjoyed this afternoon together, and in that moment, he shared something with me. He said this morning when I knew I was stuck on chores and everyone was on rec, I thought, fuck it, I'm gonna run. Fuck it. I was thinking I'm gonna run today. Gonna run. The man clears his throat again, and when he continues, it's eerie. It's that of a child. Thought that I would run today, but I decided to wait until everyone had gone on rec. Started cleaning, we began talking, we were playing guitar and we were singing. At some point I decided that I didn't want to run. And I'm glad that I didn't run. The voice goes silent but for the sound of his breathing. A car goes by and there's a full 60 seconds of dead space before the memo clicks off.
Nice job, brother.